Hello and welcome to ETV Bharat. Today we are going to discuss the recommendations of 15th Finance Commission with the chairman, Mr. N.K. Singh. Sir, welcome to ETV Bharat.
Thank you.
Sir, some people say you hold the most difficult job because not only you needed to divide the resources between the center and states, but among the states themselves. That is very difficult. The horizontal devolution is very difficult. So, how challenging it was for you to divide the money between the center and states and between the states themselves?
Well, I must say that all finance commissions, from their very inception, from 1951 onwards, have faced a similar challenge, namely that under the Constitution, the right from the first Finance Commission, and I will not mention the interim Finance Commission between 1949 and 1951, but right from the first Finance Commission under the chairmanship of K.C. Niyogi, all finance commissions have to, under the Constitution, discharge the two critical responsibilities of one, dividing the resources, that is the net divisible pool between the central government and the states, and the second, that having decided how much will be given to the states from out of the gross tax revenue and this thereafter deriving the net divisible pool, what formula should be used for its interstate distribution among all the states. In our case, 28 states, earlier finance commissions, 29 states, because we assigned certain grants to the union government, because for the two union territories of Jammu Kashmir and Ladakh, since the number of states have now come from 29 to 28. So this has been a classic function. In addition, after the constitutional amendment, it has become a practice to also devolve large resources to the third tier, namely urban local bodies, to municipalities, and to panchayats. And the last one, namely for the disaster management, after the Disaster Management Act of 2005, for the National Disaster Management Fund and for the State Disaster Management Fund. In addition, of course, and this is the differentiating characteristic. So the first two, the vertical and the horizontal, is common to all finance commissions. Thereafter, after the constitutional amendments, the third tier also represented a kind of a important responsibility, and of course the disaster management. In addition, every finance commission have their own unique terms of reference. So the president this time chose to assign us many more areas on which they wanted our recommendations, which is spelled out in a rather unique terms of reference in more ways than one. Why unique? Because the number of areas on which they wanted our views on performance-based incentives, on monitorable criteria, on, for instance, a unique terms of reference, namely for defense, which was for the first time only unique to the 15th Finance Commission, and also in respect of some sectoral allocations, which they also sought our recommendation. And last but not the least, uh, the challenge of, for the first time, after 1970 up to 1974-79, the Sixth Finance Commission was using the population census data of 1971. For 40 years, the 1971 data was being used. We were the first one to be asked by the president to use the census data of 2011. And as I said, this is the broad architecture. And of course, within that framework, the issue of the fiscal consolidation roadmap and the strategy on debt and on fiscal deficits during this problematic period for 5 full years, because we are one commission which has given recommendations or awards for 6 years. One, the current year in the first report, which we gave for 2021, and thereafter for full 5 years during times which are uncertain. And that is why the Finance Commission uh, captioned this time Finance Commission in COVID times.
Sir, I wanted to ask you, the commission was constituted in November 2017. And
Yes,
before you could give your report, there was a once in century event, the outbreak of COVID-19 global pandemic. And
right,
before we entered into lockdown, you must have completed a substantial part of your discussion consultation with the states and other stakeholders. So how
right.
challenging it was for you to completely revamp to factor into the changed scenario?
So there were three important factors which came, so to say, which we had not anticipated. One, as you said, that the once in a century, if not longer, a global pandemic, of which we are also a very important victim, so to say. So this needed a recalibration of the likely revenue buoyancy, the revenue numbers, both for the center and for the states. And this time, because we have given a separate volume, namely volume 4, especially for the states, we wanted to give a unique disaggregated path for each state. So recalibrating the likely revenue numbers and recalibrating the inescapable revenue expenditure of each state
Mhm.
based on its unique circumstances was one type of a issue. Also, we had to factor in that the additional fiscal pressures on the central government from the viewpoint of both life, namely, and I'll come to the life, and livelihood,
Mhm.
we had to reckon for the fact that the central government's fiscal pressures would be certainly far more than they were earlier. And finally, the general decline in the overall revenues affecting both the central government and the state government, particularly the GST, which on which in which the state governments have a vital responsibility. So I said I'll come to life a little later because for the first time we
Mhm.
have devoted in the Finance Commission's report an entirely separate chapter
Mhm.
on on health
Mhm.
and the need for recalibrating the expenditure on the health sector,
Mhm.
particularly in respect of the engagement of the third tier, also posed an important obligation. So, in many ways, we had to go back to the drawing board
Mhm.
to redraw the fiscal and the debt roadmap for both the center and the states on account of the factors on which I have just commented.
Sir, in your report, you have taken 6.5% as a fiscal deficit, you anticipated. But in the budget, we see the fiscal deficit has gone up to 9.5%. In fact, when the revised numbers come next year, it could be even higher or even in two digits. Uh, so, do you think in such a situation, I'm going slightly beyond the recommendation, is it desirable to achieve 4.5 within 5 years? Is it desirable to achieve?
You mean, is it feasible to achieve?
Fiscal
Not
deficit, is it
desirable.
feasible to achieve?
Is it feasible to achieve?
Mhm.
So, first, I must comment on your first point that why have the fiscal numbers for the central government's overall deficit of 9.5 look so misaligned with the numbers which we had projected?
Mhm.
Now, one of the things which you must recognize is that although I had the privilege to chair the last FRBM Fiscal Responsibility Management Committee, whose
27.
recommendations were accepted in 2018, I must say that one of the things which were of great concern to the FRBM committee, and this is an equal concern to the Finance Commission, was the need for transparency and credibility of fiscal data.
Mhm.
So, what had happened in the past that through clever financial engineering, to use a polite word, both the states and the central government were doing off budget borrowing, uh, incurring contingent liabilities, having guarantees, creating parastatals, and that this had been adversely commented upon by all investors, rating agencies, and domain experts. So,
Mhm.
part of the reason for this huge bump up from the anticipated figure to the figure presented by the finance minister represents greater transparency and credibility in accounting processes itself of reckoning the true numbers of fiscal deficit and as a consequence, therefore, debt. Now, your second question is about the roadmap of whether the terminal number which they have projected for themselves is higher than the number which we have projected for the central government. It's about a half percentage point higher. So I think that there are currently serious uncertainties on the recovery process. The pandemic has not run its course. There could be serious unanticipated fiscal pressures as we get out of the pandemic and as we begin the recovery process. So they have sought a leeway for another half percent beyond the numbers which we had indicated. I mean, that is perfectly understandable. That is why, given all these uncertainties, the Finance Commission has recommended the constitution of an intergovernmental high powered group, which will go into the future roadmap of the fiscal consolidation process of the general government. Namely, it is only meaningful, which you know, if the numbers include the states and the center. Intergovernmental we have used because it includes the state governments and the central government. And that is our recommendation contained in the Commission's report, on which on the ATR presented, the government has said that these recommendations would be examined separately, namely, they would have to be considered in great detail.
Sir, I have spoken to state representatives in past, and there is a continuous demand that from the divisible pool, it should be 50-50 between the center and the states. Uh, 14 Finance Commission, as you know, recommended 42% devolution. You have kept it at around 41%. So how difficult it was, because there is a recurring demand from the states, and states complain that why center has more money despite spending less. You know that there is a vertical gap between the center and state. Center collects nearly two-thirds of the revenue and spends nearly one-third, and states collect only one-third and spend around two-thirds. So there is a continuous demand from the state, and they complain that because why center has more money, because the state finance commission gives the center more money. So how difficult it is for you or for any commission to reconcile to this fact, because they are weaker in terms of revenue collection.
So let me answer this question in two parts. In part one, let me say that anecdotally, no finance commission, present one and all previous ones, when visiting all the states, would not have received a similar request that please increase our outgo, please increase our devolution from the divisible pool. We also similarly faced this request from all state governments that yes, 32 to 42 was a very significant hike, but then planning commission was abolished, various other things happened and so on, and that therefore needs to be calibrated upwards. Similarly, as far as the central government is concerned, they were already reeling under the impact of the increase from 32 to 42. Whatever be the actual data, optically in their view, it was a 10 percentage point increase from the usual pattern prior to the 14th, which was a more incremental increase, 29 going to 32 and 33 point, and then so on. But this was a quantum change from 32 to 42. So the central government would have felt somewhat more comforted if this had been recalibrated in a somewhat downward direction. So there were both these opposite points of view. We preferred the path of stability and continuity because we felt that bringing it downwards would send, perhaps may not be appropriate in our judgment, looking at the fiscal pressures of the states, and that raising it upwards at a time like this would be also not be fair to the demands and the fiscal pressures of the central government. So we preferred the path of stability and continuity, and in cognizance of the fact that no finance commission in the past has moved except in one direction, namely the direction of an upward increase in the divisible number. And so the best we could do under the circumstances is to honor stability and continuity and predictability by keeping it at the same level at the 14th. On the point of the fact, now you see, the fact remains that you know very well that there are three important concepts. There is the gross revenue receipts, what is known as the GRR. Now, in our calculation, the gross revenue receipts based on our modeling for the 5-year period is 153.4 lakh crores. Take out of this are things which are not divisible at all: the dividend of the RBI, the dividend from the public sector undertakings, the user charges, the interest realization from outstanding loans of the central government. And this 153.4 lakh crores comes to what is known as a gross tax revenue, which was 135.4 lakh crores. Right? Now, take out of this the cess and surcharge and the cost of collection, and the divisible pool then comes to 103 lakh crores for the 5-year period. The 41%, which we have given out of the divisible pool, comes to about 42 lakh crores, right? Plus, we gave a recommendation of 10.5 lakh crores by way of grants, namely over 4 lakh crores to the third tier, 4.22 lakh crores. We have given a revenue deficit grant of 2.94 lakh crores. We have given for disaster management 1.22 lakh crores. The state specific and the sector specific are still being considered, but these have been accepted. So if you add the 10 lakh crores to the 42 lakh, it comes in the ballpark of a more even balancing out of the divisible pool of 103 lakh crores, significantly more than the 41%. Plus, I have not added that the central government each year spends over 3.5 lakh crores on the center's contribution to centrally sponsored schemes whose benefits really go to the state. And therefore, if you add all this, this does not look to be a very uneven balance. And even without adding the centrally sponsored schemes, therefore, we believe that we are somewhere in the ballpark of even balancing from the divisible pool of the center and the states in a manner which we felt was reasonable and appropriate. Now, the more difficult question is that out of the divisible pool, should cess and surcharge be included or not?
Yeah, in fact, I was coming to this point.
So please come to that point, because then I need to comment on that, because
Because
that's a very important
the
question.
states complain that the share of cess and surcharges in the last 10 years, it has constantly gone up in the total revenues collected by the center. And since cess and surcharges don't form of the part of the divisible pool, so they have been deprived of their share in this thing. So can you explain on this thing, sir?
Yes, I will. I think that the states are not wrong, that the cess and surcharge as a percentage of the GTR, or the gross tax revenue, in 2010 and 11 was 10.4%. That in the BE of 2021 has gone up to 19.9%, which is almost close to 90% increase in the period 2010-11 to the period in the BE of 2021. So technically, the states are, of course, right in saying that the burden of cess and surcharge has significantly crept up in the period 10 2010-11 to the BE of 2020-21.
Mhm.
Right. Now I have three small observations to make. First and foremost, the issue of cess and surcharge is outside the ambit of the Finance Commission because after the 80th constitutional amendment in the year 2000, the provisions of Article 269 and 270 of the Constitution specifically excludes the cess and surcharge from the calculation of the divisible pool. So this subject is outside the mandate of any finance commission. This is a subject not for finance commission, but for the parliament to consider, or whether, given the concerns of the state and based on a consensus of all stakeholders, they would seek to amend this constitutional provision which keeps cess and surcharge out of the divisible pool. But please also remember the background of the 80th constitutional amendment in the year 2000,
Mhm.
that prior to that 80th, the divisible pool had a different connotation. When the Finance Commission began, what was being divided in the earlier phases was percentages of income tax.
Mhm.
Later on came percentages of excise and different variations and mix of excise and income tax. Thereafter, it was only in the year 2000, with that constitutional amendment, that the definition of the divisible pool included all taxes, which means corporate taxes,
Mhm.
was brought fully into the thing. Tariffs were brought in fully into the divisible pool. So the definition of the divisible pool got substantially enlarged after the 80th constitutional amendment. The composition of the divisible pool, therefore, and the 80th constitutional amendment changed. It enlarged the ambit to include all divisible resources, all tax revenues, including corporate taxes, uh, and the realization of some customs duty as part of the divisible pool. So the definition of the divisible pool was enlarged. As part of that process, there is a specific provision in the Constitution which kept out cess and surcharge
Mhm.
from out of the divisible pool. Therefore, the appropriate forum to discuss this would be based on a wide-ranging consultations among all stakeholders for Parliament to take action. This is a subject outside the purview of the Finance Commission. However,
Mhm.
we have taken note of this issue in this Finance Commission, as earlier Finance Commissions have. And if you look at paragraph 3.63, paragraph 3.8, paragraph 4.25, paragraph 4.26, they are all comments on the rising incidence of cess and surcharge. And we have done one better. We have done what we could do, that recognizing that currently cess and surcharge is close to 20% of uh, the divisible of the GTR, we have calibrated it downwards to 18.4%, which means we have, in a way, while recognizing the revenue expenditure and recognizing the likely tax policy, placed it at 18.4 instead of 20, a signal for a downward direction. One final comment.
Mhm.
Final comment on this is that please do not forget that in this close to 20%, it includes the compensation cess.
Mhm.
It includes that proceeds of compensation cess entirely go to the states because the compensation cess is only being realized for purposes of enabling the states to have the guaranteed 14% up to the period of 5 years from 17 to 2021, July. And any past liabilities to be also equally calibrated from the period of the compensation cess, which has now been extended to an appropriate period. The benefits of that are entirely uh, go to the state governments. And if you therefore recalibrate the numbers
Mhm.
of around 20%, this compensation cess accounts, in our view, around 3 over 3%, around 3.3%. If you increase that, because that is benefit going to the states, this will come around 16% or so. So the real argument is the argument of the increase from 10.4 not to 20, but 10.4 to around 16% or so, which rightly the states also perceive to be somewhat unacceptably high.
Sir, yesterday Prime Minister had a meeting of Niti Aayog Governing Council, and he said that a lot of money will go to local bodies. Uh, what is Commission's view? How we can further strengthen them, our local bodies, because they are important pillar of three tiers of our system.
So, first and foremost, the Prime Minister is absolutely right when he says that the significant resources will go to the local bodies. If you look at our own devolution numbers, the devolution to local bodies, which we have given, has gone up very, very significantly to now 4.26 lakh crores during our award period. This is a significant hike from the number which was given in the 14th Finance Commission. And the Government of India, in its action taken report, has fully accepted this recommendation of this very substantial increase in the financial resources of to the third tier, namely urban local bodies and to panchayats. This is comment number one. Comment number two, of how to more purposefully engage the local bodies in programs of high priorities. So out of this 4.26 lakh crores, we have earmarked 70,000 crores to be given to the third tier for health and health related infrastructure, namely primary health centers, centers for infectious diseases, testing laboratories, and all measures which can substantially strengthen the health infrastructure at the cutting edge, namely at the edge of the third tier urban local bodies, municipalities, and the panchayat. So this is one way. We have also decided that for the on respect of the panchayats, priority must be given to national priorities like drinking water, open defecation, treatment of fecal matter, treatment ensuring water, rainwater harvesting, conservation of water, and a reasonable part here and to urban local bodies have been earmarked for what would be viewed by anyone to be national priorities. We have no doubt left nearly 40% untied,
Mhm.
which will be for purposes of their expenditure, which they consider appropriate. Finally, on this local bodies, we have made two important changes. First and foremost, one change is that for the first time, for urban local bodies, we have factored that for metro cities of one population of 1 million plus, we have brought in the issue of air pollution and the issue of the ease of breathing. We know that the number of deaths on account of air pollution and polluted particulate matter is now unacceptably high. We have therefore got for the tier one cities of 1 million plus a challenge fund which will be given to the states which achieve these benchmarks on reducing the particulate matter so to be certified by the Ministry of Environment. We have, this is for the first time we have introduced this. We have also for the first time introduced the idea of incubation of new cities. 8,000 crores have been given. We realize that one of the lessons which has come from the pandemic is congested cities have a much higher rate of infections than cities which are more better planned. And newer cities in India need to come up. India's story in genuinely new cities coming up has been a rather disappointing one. And this one of 8,000 crores has been given, no more than one for each state, for 1,000 crore or so for each of the states who take the initiative for the incubation of newer cities. There is a third important change which we have made. We have ensured the constitution of the state finance commissions. I might mention that the Finance Commission is not obliged under the Constitution to give any resources to the third tier. All that the Constitution says is that the Finance Commission would suggest the augmentation of the consolidated fund of the state based on the recommendations of the State Finance Commission for meeting the expenditure of the third tier. Our experience has been that state governments have been rather lax in the constitution of the State Finance Commissions, or lax in presenting its report to the Assembly, or tardy in the implementation of those recommendations. And therefore, the third tier has come to more or less depend almost exclusively on grants of one kind or the other, primarily the Finance Commission. This is not the spirit in which autonomy was to be given to the third tier. They must be financially self-sustaining in itself. In addition to this, we have suggested, no doubt, the compulsory auditing of accounts, because these are public money. They must be properly audited and accounted and uploaded. It must be in public domain. And we wanted to make the urban local bodies financially, particularly independent. After the GST, which has subsumed many of the taxes which used to accrue to many of the third tier, we realized that the issue of financial autonomy was a challenging one. That is why we have suggested the, the genuine use of the one important taxation instrument which they have, namely property tax.
Mhm.
We found that the many state governments have antique property tax laws. In many cases, they are next to negligible. In quite a few cases, they are certainly not indexed
Mhm.
to either price or any behavior. So the imposition of a property tax and its indexation to the state per capita income or the state GDP has also been made an important entry level condition. For all this, we have not put it in place instantly. We have got a transition path which will enable the third tier to prepare for accepting these conditions, because we do believe that while large public outlays of 4.26 lakh crores are going, public outlay must be accounted and public outlay must be optimized. That is why we felt that this approach was perhaps more meaningful for the third tier.
Sir, your commission also had to deal with one question which no other previous commission had to deal, to provide money for India's security challenges, both internal and external. And I was looking at your recommendation. You have given data that defense pension alone accounts for nearly 28-29% of the total defense budget of the country. An army officer or military officer enters in the service at around age of 19, 20, 21, and he serves the country for 20 years. But due to increase in the expectancy, he goes on to live for 80, 90 years. So for 40, 50, 60 years, that burden will be there. How can we solve this problem, and what are the methods that you suggested to improve India's security challenges, to tackle India's security challenges?
So actually, we addressed not the overall question of the modernization of the defense forces. Our terms of reference was a specific one,
Mhm.
which is to examine the issue and the question of the creation of a non lapsable fund for the capital expenditure
Mhm.
of the defense and internal security. And if so, the appropriateness of a financing mechanism
Mhm.
for meeting capital expenditure. Now, we constituted an internal group, uh, which we were informed. This group was under my chairmanship. It had defense secretary. We had consultations with the chief of defense. It had home secretary. It had expenditure secretary, current expenditure secretary as members of the group. We considered all options, and we came to the conclusion, the commission came to the conclusion that there is asymmetry in the availability of resources and the nature of the procurement for capital expenditure.
Mhm.
Namely, that the cycle of legislative approval is not in sync with the procurement cycle.
Mhm.
And that to bridge this, the only way was the constitution of a non lapsable fund, which we have therefore recommended. We
Mhm.
then had the challenge of how is this non lapsable fund to be created and to be financed. It would be kept in the public accounts, the non lapsable fund. And we felt we have given a model
Mhm.
to in our report, which comprises of two important components. One, the recycling or defense ministry's own internal resources, namely monetization of the surplus defense land, the proceeds of the disinvestment of the defense public sector undertakings,
Mhm.
and also in respect of uh, any other financial resources on account of the payment of outstandings from state governments and other public entities. In addition, we have recalibrated the GRR, the gross revenue receipts, by recalibrating the grants component by 1%, which will enable fiscal space to be created for payments to be made from out of the Consolidated Fund of India. This is a model which we have proposed. The central government in ATR has accepted in principle the constitution of a non-lapsable fund, and on the modeling of on the financial provisions of the non-lapsable fund, it is going to consider all the available options and come to an appropriate conclusion.
Yeah, sir, I have a last question from my colleague Rajiv, who also covers Foreign this finance bit. He just wanted to know southern states opposed inclusion of 2011 population in your terms of reference. So, how did you strike a balance, or how did you persuade them to accept this thing that better represents what transpired between you and southern states during your meetings with southern states?
I mean, I must say that the recommendations of the award of the Finance Commission is not an effort to reach a consensus. They
Mhm.
are an effort to have meaningful consultations with all stakeholders, namely all the 28 states uh, and the union government and other important entities, and reach conclusions which are appropriate. It's not, it's a consultative process, not a consensus process. So this is one. Now, how have we addressed the concerns of many states which felt that the use of the population figure or census of 2011 than 1971 would adversely affect them? We did it by three important instruments. First, instead of treating demography and population in one category, we reduced the weightage to population, but we introduced a new component, namely in our horizontal formula, we introduced the criteria of demographic management, and we have assigned the weight of 12.5% to demographic management. This criteria directly is designed to reward and recognize the efforts of the states, which have brought their population to better management through investments in health, in investments in education, girl child education, and improved governance in managing demography much more optimally than some of the other states. So this 12.5% is a significant weightage out of the 100 from where we have to give the weightage. In addition, to reward such efficient states, we introduce another criteria, namely tax and fiscal efforts, and have given the weightage of 2.5% to that. So when the two added together, really add to about 15% weightage to reward efficiency and better governance. And that was the formula by which we sought to balance out. The second important formula which we used is, in spite of this, we did see that some of the states would have had seen a very sharp decline
Mhm.
in the devolution and the resources and availability of the resources. So our recommendations, which have been accepted in toto of 2.94 lakh crores by way of revenue deficit grants under Article 275 of the Constitution, is fully accepted by the central government. If you see the to who are the beneficiaries of this significant revenue deficit grants. It happened to be many of the southern states, um, Andhra, for instance, and Kerala, even some northern states who have done well, like West Bengal and Punjab, have received from the. So, this was the third important instrument. First, the recalibration of the formula of horizontal devolution itself. Second, by way of assigning the revenue deficit grants. We have therefore arrived at what we believe is balanced and reasonable, looking at the fact that we did face the unique challenge that after 40 years, we moved over to the use of the 2011 census figure. Incidentally, there's nothing wrong in using the 2011 because, after all, why do you use population data? To represent needs.
Mhm.
The needs of the people are reflected better by using data and figures which are contemporary. In fact, we did not have the data because very soon the 2021 census data will also be in public domain, which is for a future finance commission to see and for the president to decide on what figure they would like the finance commission to work. But we did seek to balance out
Mhm.
and to did seek to ensure that the three important driving objectives were met. In the evolution of the horizontal formula, we sought to evenly balance needs, needs by way of assigning weightage to population, to geographical area, and to forest cover, to equity by assigning a weightage to per capita income distance method, and to performance by way of the emphasis we have given to demographic management and to tax and fiscal efforts, in addition to the assignment of revenue deficit grants.
Mhm. Sir, thank you very much for speaking to ETV Bharat. So this was Mr. N.K. Singh, Chairman of 15 Finance Commission. These are his words. He told us that Commission tried to strike a balance between the competing demand of the states and the union, and also of the states themselves. And the Commission, though it is not constitutionally obliged, assigned a large number of resources to third tier of the local bodies, more than 4.2 lakhs, 2 lakh crore rupees. Thank you very much for watching ETV Bharat. Sir, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.